Hello and welcome to Code Harvest. In this video, I'll be demonstrating step by step how you can create a carousel that never stops even at the beginning and end point, and we're going to be using JavaScript to help us achieve this. This is part 2 of the tutorial. Check out part 1 in the pinned comment down below. Subscribe to Code Harvest if you haven't already, and now let's get started. Alright, so now the next thing that we're going to be working on is shift forward and shift backward functions. So we're going to be using these two functions only to remove the old slide that needs to be removed, and then we're also going to calculate the new position that needs to be displayed, and we're also going to be adding one more function, so a third function, in order to show and display the next element that needs to be displayed. But shift forward and shift backward will just be used to calculate the position of the new element that needs to be displayed. So we're first going to work on shift forward, since it's slightly easier than shift backward, and so we're just going to pass in the parameters. And so first thing that we want to do is we want to get the active slides, only the active slides, so that we can access the first one, get it removed, and calculate the new one. So we're going to use query selector all, and now that we have active slides created, we want to access the first element so that we can remove it from the carousel. So not remove it completely, just hide it really. So we're going to remove the active class, which does not do anything CSS wise, however it just removes the active class so that it's no longer identified as an active class. And then we are going to we're also going to remove the width, so we're going to set it to 0. Alright, the next thing that we want to do is we want to calculate the next position that needs to be displayed. In order to get that, we have to first get the last active slide that is available. So we are going to create a variable. We're going to call this last active slide so that we can get the slide that's at the furthest right. And then we are going to access this through the active slides array. In order to get the last position, we get the total number of active slides that there are, and subtracted by 1 since positioning starts from 0. And then we're going to create a new variable, and we're going to store or call this new slide position, and what we're going to store here is the calculated new position. So we're going to use last active slide, and we want to get its position in the whole container, not just the active slides but the whole container. In order to do that, we're gonna have to check our index file, and when we see each of these slide boxes, we can see that each of them have a data attribute, and they're part of a data set called slide box, but they all have different values. So we're going to use that to get its position in the all slides container. So we're going to access dataset, and the dataset name is called slide box. So here we would have to use a hyphen in order to separate the words, but here we can use camel casing. So now we can just add this by 1 and we would get the next element. So if we click on the next button, we can get slide 6. So from 5 to 6, 4 to 5, etc. However, when we get to the last slide of the all slides container, which is slide 10, as when we check our index file, we can see we have included 10 slides in total. We want to create an infinity carousel, so we want it to go back to 1, and we want 1 to also appear at the right side. We don't want 1 to appear towards the left side. We'll fix that with our third function. However, we need slide 10 to transition to slide 1. We want to get slide 1 if the last active slide was slide 10. So in order to do that, we are going to have to get the modulus of the position, last active slide position. So we're just going to create a bracket here. Right over here, we're going to use the modulo operator, and we want this active slide. So for example, if it was at 4, we want it to be divided by the total number, which in our case it's the number 10. So that 4 divided by 10 would give you 0, but then the remainder would be 4. If it was 5 divided by 10, the answer would be 0 but remainder of 5. So the modulo operator helps us to get just the remainder. So for the remainder, I mean. So for example, if it was 9 divided by 10, it will give you the answer of 10. However, if the number is divisible, then it will give you 0. So for example, so no remainder basically. So if it was 10 divided by 10, 10 divided by 10 does not give any remainder, so it will give you the answer of 0, and that's what we want. We want to access the first element if the current last active slide is the last is number 10 in our case. So we're going to use number of sliders. So then if it was just a normal number, so for example, if it was the number 4, we want to get to the number 5, the current number is the number 4, 4 divided by 10 is just 4, and it would just add on, and it would just increment by 1. Alright, so now what we're gonna do is we're going to pass in these values as parameters in the third function that we'll create later on, and so we will create a function called new L. And so we're going to pass in 3 parameters. So the first value that we want to pass on is that the function that we want to occur is forward, so we want the new slide to appear towards the right and not the left. The second one is we want it to be able to access slides container so that it can add the new element, and then we also want to get the position, which is a new slide position. Alright, so now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a new function, and we're going to call this shift backward, and we're going to pass in the same variables as we did for shift forward. And so the first thing that we want to do is we want to access all of the active slides, and this time we're going to basically just copy this, and we're going to access all of the active slides. However, we're going to access the different elements instead. So for example, for shift forward, we needed to remove the first element. However, now we want to move backward, so we need to get the last element and remove it so that a new element from this side can appear. So we're going to change the value, and in order to access the last element of active slides, we can get it through getting the total number of active slides that are, and subtract it by 1, since numbering starts from 0 rather than 1. So now we're able to access the last element. We want to remove the active class and set the width to 0 so that it no longer appears. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to get the first active slide there is, so that we can know what element should come next, what element should come before the first active slide. So now this should be position number 0 of the active slides array, and then we want to create a new slide. We want to get the new slide position. So we're going to create a one-line if conditional statement. So the new slide position depends on a condition. If first active slide is 1, let me just put that in a semicolon. So if the first active slide is 1, then that means, because we're creating an infinity carousel, that should not stop even when it's at the beginning or end points. If it is slide 1, then that means the previous slide should be the last slide of the slides of the total slides container. So when we check our HTML page, we can see that we have 10 slides in total. So before slide 1 should be slide 10, which is the last element of the all slides container. But if it was any other number than slide 1, if it was slide 10, then the previous slide should be slide 9. If it was 8, 7, 3, 2, 2, 1. But if it was slide 1, then it should go back to slide 10. So now we're going to create a one-line if conditional statement rather than just creating 4 lines of code. We can just write the if conditional statement in 1 line, since the value determines on a condition on whether first active slide is 1 or not. So we're first going to include our condition in parentheses. So we want to know if first active slide, if the position in the all slides container equals to 1. So in order to do that, we can access the position that it is in through the data attribute that we added, and we've added the name of the data set slidebox. They all have the slidebox data set. So we're going to access the data set for the current first active slide, and so we want to know if this equals to 1. So we can't do if it is accurately equal to 1, because 1 is a string. Because 1 is set, the value is set as strings. So we can either check whether it equals to 1 as a string, or we can also check if it equals to 1, because 2 equal signs does not check whether the type is the same. However, if the value is the same, if it's 1, 1, but it doesn't check if the type is the same. However, 3 equal signs will check if the type is the same as well. So we'll just set it as this, and then we want to add in the truth value. So if this is true, then the truth value should be set. And the truth value should be the last element of the slides container, and we've set it in number of sliders. So the number of sliders returns the total number of sliders in all slides container, and in our case would be the number 10. And then the false value would be the value or the position should just be decremented by 1, so that if it was 4, it goes back to 3, and so on. Now the last thing that we're going to do is we want to pass in these elements as arguments. So the first thing we want to pass in is the direction. So the direction is going to be backward this time. So this tells the new element should appear from the left rather than from the right. And then we want to pass in the slides container so that the new element can be added to the slides container. And then we also want to pass in the new slide position. Alright, so now we're going to create a new function. We're going to call this new L. And here we're going to pass in the arguments that we have included for the shift backward and the shift forward functions. So the first one we will store it in a variable called direction, so either forward or backward. Then the second one is the slides container. We'll just call it container list. And then the last is the position, so we'll just call it pause for short. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to access the element that should be displayed. So we're going to call this new element, and we're going to access this through the container list, which holds all of the slide boxes. Then we're going to search for the specific element that is in this position. And this position basically represents the data slide box attribute value. So we want to select the slide box, and then we want to access basically the data set of slide box. So in order to do that, we can just put in the name data slide box just like we did in HTML, and then we can include the value, so whether it be 1 or 2 or 3. So we're going to add in a variable, we're going to mix it with the string, so we're going to use backticks instead so that we can add this variable, the pause variable. Then we can close this, and now through this we've gotten the slide box that has the specific value that we specified of the data slide box attribute. And now the next thing that we want to do is we want to know whether this element should be added towards the right or added towards the left. So we're going to create an if conditional statement, and we want to know what the direction is, if it is forward or if it is backward. So if the direction is forward, then that means the next button was clicked and the new element should appear towards the right side. Now for an element to appear towards the right side, it needs to be the last element of the list or of the container. And so in order to put the new element to be the last element, we are going to have to use append. So we're going to call the container list, and we want to append a new element. Well, it's not, you see, the element already exists in the container list. As we've already accessed it, it already exists. So what append will do, it will not remove it and then add it to be the last element. It will just move it. So it will not remove and add, it will just remove it to be the last element. So this is very beneficial, as when, for example, the last slide is slide number 10, as 10 is the last slide in our case, and then that means when the next one is clicked, we want slide 1 to appear next. And so slide 1 would normally be the first element in the container list, so append will just move that slide 1 to be the last element, so that slide 1 appears to be towards the right side, and that helps us to create an infinity carousel which does not stop even at the beginning or ending points. So now we're going to create the condition for backward. And so if the previous button was clicked, then next we want to prepend the new element, and that will move this element, the current element, to be displayed towards the left side. So it will move it to be the first element of the container list. So for example, if the last slide is the slide that appears here is slide 1, which it is right now, and if I click on previous, then slide 10 should be previous, and slide 10 would normally be at the last element of the container. So we want slide 10 to move to be the first element so that it can appear towards the left side. So append and prepend is very, very helpful in our case. And if neither of these are true, then that means an error has occurred, something externally might have affected the results, so we can call it a syntax error. And we can, if we're debugging, we can let ourselves know that the direction may have been unknown. Now the next thing that we need to do is our function does not work just yet, because we need to call in with size so that the width can be defined, because the new element is still at width 0 and we haven't added it as we haven't identified it as an active class yet. So we're going to add the active class so that it can be identified as an active class, which will be helpful for the with size function. And then we want to call in with size as well so that the changes can take place, and since it takes in the slides container, so now we're going to input the container list changes, the current container list with the changes that it has. So now when we reload our page and when we click on next, we can see slide 6 comes next. When we go back, slide 5. When we go back, slide 1. And let's see, slide 10 appears before slide 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and it continues. And then let's also check for next. Everything goes well, and at slide 10, slide 1 becomes next. So now we can see that our function works. So now our carousel is complete.
Angel on the track. I'ma let kid be.